Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Spark Talk. Today I have with me Oskar and Chris. Hello, Oskar and Chris.
Oh,
Great. Oskar and Chris join me here from our Australian section, all the way, the land down under. Yes? Right. So welcome, comrades. Do you want to say a little bit about the section?
Well, the section's been around for decades.
Mhm.
We go back to the 70s.
Wow, okay. That's
Yeah.
quite some time, about 50 years almost.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Uh-huh.
But last year, based on the reorientation of the ICL,
Yeah.
we had a principal fusion between SLA and a small group called the Bolshevik Leninists. And this has really been very impactful for us. As a consequence, being able to produce a new newspaper, the title of which is Red Battler.
Yes, as I'm told, the term battler has some significance in Australia. Do you want to tell us what Red Battler is trying to convey?
I think the battler has quite a few connotations in Australia. I think at its core, it's like one who fights, a little person who fights,
Right. Battler.
and battles against, and I think the important word in that is red, in that we want to fight and to bat them that way,
right?
But in a way that points the need for a Marxist program.
This might be wrong, but I think the derivation of the term in Australia goes back to the Depression, and itinerant workers going from job to job were called battlers.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have to fact check that one, but
okay. Well, interesting nonetheless. I guess I want to start with a question that I am sure is on nobody's mind because Australia is not being talked about. So what's happening in Australia? Like, nobody is talking about it. Like, Trump is turning the screw on the world, and somehow Australia has not been in the news, despite, as I've just learned, it's got elections coming up in less than a month. Yeah. So I'm just a bit puzzled. What's going on in Australia, and why is it not making any kind of international news?
I think you're right that no one wants to talk about it. Australia, including a lot of Australians, in spite of the election that's coming up. And I think for a long time that's what the ruling class in this country really likes.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of fly under the radar, sort of be an oasis of away from kind of the crises of the world situation, especially as they escalate right now. And I think right now there's still a lot of illusions and sort of paralysis among that ruling class that they can continue to do that, and that's possible, and that we can. It's a country that can escape this and continue the good times, as depending on how good they've been. But I think that's becoming increasingly an impossible situation as the reality of the world situation imposes itself.
That raises a couple of questions, which is, well, why is this ruling class kind of lulling itself into this belief? It just doesn't quite make sense to me.
Well, the first issue of Red Battler that we put out had a lead article called Lucky Country in Denial.
Right.
And it was the part of the theme of that was that the ruling class were denying that the screws were going to be turned on it. And now, with the Trump effect, if you like, that is actually happening. What are the screws? Well, the problem with the Australian ruling class is their major big brother protector is the United States. This is historic since World War II. And their main trading partner is China. So with Trump hitting China with 34% tariffs, which is what we've read, this is going to impact the Australian economy drastically. And the Australian economy doesn't have a lot outside of the export of mineral resources. And so we've described it as a quarry with a view in the past. And so now the ruling class are really in a fix. Yeah. I don't know if that answers.
No, it definitely helps to place Australia in perspective because, big brother US, yet main trading partner China. And guess what? The main rivalry right now is US and China. The whole Trump strategy is to rally against China. So oddly enough, one would think anyways that Australia would be more implicated in this and the ruling class would be more conscious of this, yet it seems to be doing the opposite.
I think it's pretty clear that there's only one direction that this is going, and it's not the direction that is good for an Australian economy, which is, well, yeah, we say a quarry with a view, you know.
So what does that mean for non-Australians? Is that like a particularly Australian phrase, or just one I'm not familiar with? What does that mean?
What it means is that the Australian economy is largely based on mining, quarry, view tourism, so a quarry with a view.
You could add to that like a huge housing bubble and like things are like that. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, cool. To go back to the point. Right, so things are not pointing to a good direction, right? The other thing about the Australian economy that I do know about is there's a massive housing bubble. I was going to say surprised, but I don't think I am actually, that housing in Sydney and Melbourne is like some of the most expensive in the country, but also it's like quite expensive even by international standards. Yes.
Someone who rents, not surprising to me that that's the case. But yeah, it's pretty clear that like this is the direction, that this is sort of the underlying contradiction. No one in the ruling class wants to like acknowledge that reality.
Right. I would like to so park that for a second and turn to the working class. One thing that Australia stands out for is the recent struggles of the CFMEU, both I think dating back to the lockdowns and then more recently as well. They're known as a very kind of militant union, quite significant in terms of their social weight and their willingness to fight. And as I understand it, these struggles have played an important role in the recent period in terms of kind of the mood in the country and you know, the political dynamics. Could you explain to our listeners what's been happening?
Well, maybe 5-6 months ago, there was a bunch of bourgeois media reports about corruption within the union. The Labor government seized on these and, long story short, put the union under government control. Unfortunately, as you say, it's the most militant union in the country, probably. The union leadership has largely, apart from a couple of large demonstrations, acceded to this government control. And so what you have at the moment is this sort of stasis, paralysis, if you like, whereby the union is under government control, but, you know, you go past most union sites, they're covered in most building sites. They're covered in union flags.
So there's a huge pushback by the membership.
No, it's the union has been beheaded, but still at the base, you know, the government has not been able to excise the union from construction sites. This cannot last, and already there's anxiety within the ruling class about, okay, look, we've got to dig deeper. We've got to get the union out of the construction industry.
And to be clear, what this administration of the union entails concretely, it's the government can hire and fire whoever it wants in the leadership at the top echelons of like the elected leadership of the union. You can fire, you know, from shop floor delegates, people. You can prosecute anybody who tries to stand up against.
So it's really a move by the government to crush the union.
Absolutely.
To crush the vanguard, you know, force of the Australian working class.
Yeah, and I mean, the bourgeoisie is not known for its prescience in Australia, but this was really a preemptive shot. You know, there was some understanding of there was going to be a need to crack down on the working class, and so putting the construction union under administration, as I said, was preemptive. So if they can do this to the construction union, and workers in that country know this, they can do it to any union or any militant.
So how has this move been received by the broader labour movement? Like, has there been a broader concerted fight back? Is there anything? Or
do you want to speak?
I think it's been by the leadership of the labour movement, which holds the whole of the working class, or the organised working class, in really a vice. It's been received with total like acquiescence to the government, with active support from the ACTU, the Federation of Trade Unions in the country, with active support from the leadership, the trade union bureaucracy of almost every other union, aside from a small few industrial unions, which are sort of can be considered sort of brother unions to the CFMU, also quite militant, be like the Maritime Union and the Electricians Union and the Plumbers Union. And they're ones who've, like, alongside some exiled sort of leaders from this union, brought together these what fight did happen, which Chris spoke to, you know, a few one-day demonstrations, but also really being part of the thing of using these sort of struggles to clamp down on and let out some steam from like the real anger that was like exploding at the base of this militant union when it was initially the hammer came down on it.
Well, there's actually really no question. I don't think there's any question that It would have taken just one phone call when the government decided to put the union under government control, by someone in the leadership of that union, we're not taking this, and the industry would have been shut down.
Really? Is that really the sounds? I mean, especially in the Western world, that sounds very, very powerful.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm overstating things, but I don't think so. But that phone call never came. Right. That's the main point.
Exactly.
And this is the left union leadership. And then, as Oskar was saying, you've got the building industry group unions, who are all left-leaning union leaders, and they've talked a lot about what they're going to do to defend the CFMEU, but there's been little to nothing.
Right, yeah.
And so what's happening within the class, I think, is, as you would expect, is a sort of a degeneration going on. Well, like, okay, we're waiting. How long do you wait?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then people start to say, well,
if it doesn't go in the good direction, it's going to slowly start going towards demoralization.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, it's that these are leaders who are chained at the hip and always have been to the Australian Labor Party, which is bringing the hammer down. I mean, I think there's no question that if the Liberal Party, the Conservatives in the country, if they were the ones bringing the hammer down on the union, there would have been that phone call made, Yeah. But when it's the ALP, which has always been historically the most useful and efficient tool of the ruling class to suppress the working class movement, there's just a full tendency across the board towards capitulation to a greater or lesser degree, but always to the degree of refusing to wage the fight back that would be necessary to prevent this from happening.
I guess which logically leads me to talk about Albanese. Yes. So, and the elections coming up. I understand better now the kind of the situation, the tightening that's about to happen on Australian economy. You've had, it seems to be a considerable defeat, if I'm right in saying that, for the CFMEU. The broader labour movement hasn't really taken a stand. That's not a good situation. Trump is going to lead to dramatic changes. And then there's the election. So who are the contending forces in the elections?
The Labor Party, which is the government party at the moment, which is led by a guy called Anthony Albanese, who is ostensibly on the left of the Labor Party. And then you have a coalition called the Liberal National Party Coalition. And they're conservatives, made up of conservative urban elements and country rural elements. That's the National Party component. Their politics is historically quite reactionary. And so they're the two contenders. And something kind of interesting is happening at the moment in the country is that Albanese has been dropping any liberal talk and reducing it. And the opposition leader, who'd been known as somewhat of a really reactionary head kicker type, they're both trying to make themselves a small target, if you know what I mean. So he's, let me give you one example. There was a Chinese vessel that sailed along the east coast of Australia, caused all sorts of media uproar and so on. Peter Dutton, who's the leader of the coalition, came out and described the Labor Party's response as being limp-wristed. The Labor Party said, well, we're not going to say anything about that. Dutton then apologised. Now, would that be happening in America at the moment? I don't think so. So that's, yeah.
They will make one or two remarks like, you can take up what you mean by limp-wristed or whatever. And immediately I'm so sorry about that.
Interesting.
I think it's a party that's really, for a short period, was feeling sort of the wind in their sails of Trump coming to power. The right has is ascendant, which is true internationally. But very quickly, it was clear that was not going to be a winning message when, that saying that the right was in America was saying tariffs on Australia, and there was a lot of sort of discontent around that.
It's just to put it more concisely. So what is the key issue posed in these elections? What are these two competing forces fighting about? What's the key issue animating the working class?
It's cost of living, which I think is kind of like the lowest sort of type of, it's true, and it is animating regular people. Prices are really high. Groceries are way more expensive. Rent is high. And so both parties are sort of competing with each other to show that their policies are going to be the best at showing that, or if you're the Labor Party in power, to showing that they're the ones who are already in the process of doing that. I think it's pretty unsuccessful right now to do that from the policies of the coalition. Ultimately, behind it, neither of them have any answer to the actual crisis of living in this country, and even more importantly, have no answer to the impending crisis, which is going to make everything so much worse, to the actual questions of the day that are increasingly going to impose themselves and just be a huge force driving down living conditions for people in Australia.
I want to come back to something you said earlier, Chris, which is dropping, Albanese, the kind of so-called liberal, well, not so-called, ditching liberal values. This is something we've witnessed in the last few years, and with the Democrats in the U.S., Britain, Starmer. There's just this rightward shift in politics. I think what that raises in my mind is the question of Palestine, because as I understand it, that had some role to play in terms of Albanese's kind of really cracking down on the liberal politics.
Yeah, just briefly, I think Starmer is really a good point to bring up. That Starmer is like the model of the modern Labour right in Britain, obviously, but also in Australia. I think that's where the trends are going for Labour right politics right now. And I think, with Palestine, I think it's actually with Albanese specifically quite a striking example, because historically, when he was like a student Labour activist, even like a new politician, he was the Labour Party pro-Palestine guy.
Oh, really?
That's the thing. He would speak at Palestine protests, all of these big things. What's he done in power? Absolutely backed Israel. They're still, backed Israel, crushed attacked the Palestine movement, and just had a purely sort of reactionary anti-Palestinian role.
Well, yeah, and in that context, there have been big demonstrations. Come back again to the left union bureaucrats who haven't defended the CFMEU. They've made a lot of noise about Palestine. They speak at the demonstrations often and so on and so forth.
These bureaucrats would go to the Palestine demos?
Yes, and they'd speak from the platform, and they'd say nice things about like what needed to be done, etc., etc. When it comes to mobilizing their base to do anything about defending Palestinians or even defending these demonstrations, which from time to time have been attacked, zero.
Stopping military material being shipped to Israel.
So in that sense, there's been a congruence between their position and the liberal leadership of these protests, and such that people have become kind of demoralized, and the demonstrations have shrunk and shrunk until such time as they're really a shell of their former self. And unfortunately, the left have gone along and covered for these left union bureaucrats and tailed them.
And again, I think it reminds me so much of what we've seen in Britain. There's just two separate tracks. You have the whatever kind of, I don't even know what working class struggle there's been since 2023, but, you got the kind of other issues, and then you got Palestine. And there's just no congruence, except, who comes to the big Palestine, platforms to speak? It's the kind of big fashionable union leaders, right? They give it all their backing, but they won't actually do anything about it to link and mobilize the base of their unions. I think that was the exact same case in the US. And all of these places, like the Palestine movements are really, like, as you said, a shell of their former selves. I guess what this brings me to is, like, as I'm getting to learn a little bit more about what's been happening in Australia, it is following similar trends, right, that we're seeing in other Western countries. Yet there's a sense of delusion that it's not actually happening. It's like just conscious denial, which, I think Lucky Country in Denial is just very, very brilliant headline. So again, I think maybe just to drive home the point, so what are we facing here?
Yeah, I mean, on this point of denial, I'm going to read a quote because it's a good bit of entertainment for the listeners. I think this is the Treasurer Jim Chalmers, Labour Party Treasurer Jim Chalmers, on the eve of the election in defence of the new budget that's put forward. I won't read out the whole thing, but I'll just say, he says, and I quote, "The global economy is volatile and unpredictable. 2020s have already seen a global pandemic, global inflation, the threat of a global trade war, etc., etc., etc. There's storm clouds around Australia. The storm clouds are gathering in the global economy too. Trade disruptions are rising. China's growth is slowing. War is still raging in Europe. And a ceasefire in the Middle East is breaking down." He says, "Australia is neither uniquely impacted nor immune from these pressures, but we are among the best placed to navigate them. We're emerging from this spike in global inflation in better shape than almost any other advanced economy. All of this means the soft landing we've been planning and preparing for is looking more and more likely. Because of our collective efforts, the worst is behind us, and the economy is now heading in the right direction.
Oh my God.
And he concludes, it's even more important and even more remarkable that Australia's economy is turning the corner when we know the global economy is taking a turn for the worse. Ultimately, he says, Australia is neither uniquely impacted nor immune from these pressures, but we are among the best placed to navigate them. It's really, that sums up the delusion in a country which, as we said at the start, is defined by one, trade with China, two, like alliance and reliance on the US as its political and military backer, and it's linked to being a junior partner in the imperialist world order led by the US at a time when that is conflicting with its biggest trading partner. It's like, well, we're in the best place ever, it's all up from here. It's just
all gonna blow up in their face. It's just a matter of time.
And it does give new meaning to the term delusional. And see, we did an editorial on our most recent Red Battler called Australia at the Crossroads. Which was kind of piggybacked off the Lucky Country in Denial, or it was an extension of it. And it is very true. The hammer blows are going to come down against the working class. And so that's what the working class in that country confronts. Organisations are at a crossroads, and we see that with the CFMEU stuff. It cannot last forever, that's for sure. And, we make the point that the workers' movement needs to organise now to start defending itself against the inevitable attacks that are going to come down the chute very soon.
I guess this does kind of lead us to the next phase of this discussion, which is, right, so you've got just, a recipe that's for failure. But within this context, now obviously we are communists. We are working in Australia. Well, you are working in Australia. You've already alluded to the fact that we need to signal to the class, to prepare for defensive struggles, to weather the coming storm. What does that look like, right? What are we trying to say going forward into this period about, we're the communists. This is our understanding of the world. We know that, but this is what the working class should be doing. I guess we can start with the elections. So, what does a working class voter do in these elections?
Well, the key position that we want to get across is very Labor.
I think coming into this upcoming election, we have Labor in there and the Liberal Party, obviously. You have alongside that, the Greens are kind of a minor third party that are a factor with a totally liberal petty bourgeois program. And I think what we want to say is that what we want to push is that what's needed to come out of this election is to bury Labor, to break with the Labor Party and with those in the union movement, which is basically the entire union movement, which conciliates to it, and those on the left who conciliate to the Labor Party and to the left union leaders who are tied to it. I think there are openings for that. There are organizations which are running on campaigns which are, promising to offer a alternative and a different path to Labor and the Greens. Think about Victorian Socialist, which is a electoral project mainly run by a socialist organisation in the country, one of the larger ones. We have Socialist Alliance, which are also running. They're both running on pretty much identical programs, which profess to offer an alternative to Labor and the Greens, a socialist alternative, an explicitly socialist one.
Okay, so as you said, professing, objectively opposing these organizations, and therefore offering us the possibility of actually building something.
Yes.
And I think that's what's key. Right.
Yes.
That you've got a class facing these two dead ends.
Yeah.
There's a need to have an alternative that can draw a class line, and we want to strengthen that opposition. We want to build that opposition. Am I correct in saying this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And a bigger vote for parties which are opposed to the status quo and to Labor is going that from the left is positive to kind of preparing the working class and the oppressed in this country for the crisis ahead.
Because we would like the biggest possible anti-Labor, if you like, front in these elections. We think that would strengthen the possibilities for working people.
At the same time, as I think is quite clear, we have plenty of disagreements with the program of these and the orientation of these groups.
I think anybody who's familiar with the Sparks, they know that we have plenty of differences. But I think,
and we're happy to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what's key is that, and this is a theme that's come up recently in a lot of our discussions in the party, which is that, especially in this period, there is a need for united front actions. right? That does not mean we bury our differences. It only means that we find opportunities to work together where they not only avail themselves, but when they are necessary, right? And I think the elections present such a case. And within that framework, we have our differences, we fight them out, we fight for clarity. But to the extent that we agree that, hello, at this current juncture, working class is not facing a good situation, right? Lacking some kind of a working class alternative, the situation can only get worse. And I think, seen from that point of view, it's really, I think, it would be a very, I don't want to say criminal, I'll just say criminal anyways, to not offer that critical support and to not fight to build such an alternative, right? Because, well, what's the whole point of what we're trying to do? We're trying to fight to advance the interests of the class at these moments, at every juncture.
And I think what we see as critical to doing that is to really try to make the argument about the ways in which the program of these organizations, as exists, actually undercuts their ability to offer an alternative and to fight against the status quo represented by Labour and the kind of bankrupt sort of liberal alternative offered by the Greens. One kind of important aspect of that is that, like, in Australia, we do have a system of preferential voting where you firstly you have to vote, and then secondly you have to vote from your first preference down to your last preference, with some exceptions in different campaigns and everything. But what all of these, taking that as given, what all these groups make clear and talk a lot about is, everybody, don't worry about voting for us. You won't waste your vote, because you vote for us, your preferences are still going to end up, you can still have your vote go, if we don't win, to the Greens, to Labour, so you won't waste it on us, because it'd be a waste for the working class and for the socialist movement to make a principled stand against these kind of traitors.
If I understand that correctly, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, it's almost as if you're signaling weakness and defeat before you've really even begun a fight.
I think that's fair.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, and I think this is kind of the whole point of United Front work, or trying to actually fight for a working class alternative. It's like, we have to take things as they are. So this gives, these organizations, whatever they're professing to say, at least they're saying it. That matters. That's important, because many are not even saying what's necessary, right? So we have to start with that, but then push them forward to actually fight for bigger forces, fight amongst the left to have more unity on the basis of opposing, burying Labour, as you said, right?
And in that framework, fight for some things that are really like sharp questions in the country. And so, like, what we're thinking about are things like defend the Palestinians
and defend the CFMEU, which increasingly these groups, even if they have positions on it, don't make a central point of their campaigns, and they want to talk about these sort of not smaller questions, but like more kind of acceptable questions to the ruling class, which really undercuts like a real avenue to be fighting for a working class perspective among layers of people who are really upset about what's happened.
I think a demand to defend the CFMEU would appeal to a lot of the base, as you've been describing, like the spirit, in that base, and that would appeal to those workers who, if they haven't got alternatives, they'll just continue kind of a demoralized rightward drift, I assume.
Yeah, but as Oskar said, receded more and more in the background for these organisations, and I think what's behind that is that it's probably going to upset the union bureaucrats who conciliate the Labour Party, and so you've got that chain.
Who they want to have on side.
Yeah, who they want to have on side. So that's the mechanism, if you like. Yeah. The other point is you think AUKUS. Yeah. AUKUS being the military alliance between the United States and the UK and Australia, which is a very open anti-China alliance. We think that would be an important central political point that you want to raise in any election campaign.
Because it would concretely pose, I think, like the question of jobs, like, if the economy is so tied to trade with China, right? Like to break that alliance with the US and, to actually start building unity in the Pacific. The Pacific is going to be the theater, the coming years, and it's all the more necessary for the working class in it to, well, not the junior party, but the working class of Australia to actually, for revolutionaries to be fighting to build that unity within the proletariat in East Asia and Southeast Asia and throughout.
It's a question of how you actually, what you emphasize in wage a electoral campaign, which is principled and anti-imperialist,
Yeah.
and whether you emphasize that, whether you emphasize sort of demands that are, you know, more popular and maybe just a little bit to the left of like the Greens and, you know, these other liberal forces.
And, you know, to come back to it, those are some of the differences that the Sparts would have with, you know, the program of the Victorian Socialists and the other organizations, Trust Alliance, I think. So, you know, we do have plenty of differences, but I think it's, well, this is what's posed right now. You know, working class is not a good situation. We need to take a stand and fight. Let's fight together, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, so we want to campaign around, and what we want to be saying to people is dump Labour and vote Socialist in this election. I think that's going to be in the few weeks leading up to the 3rd. That's what we want to be putting forward.
Okay, fantastic. So I've run out of questions. Is there anything else that you guys would like to say before we conclude?
Thanks so much for having us.
Okay. Indeed.
Great to be on the podcast.
Red Battler, as with all our press, is online, so just go to iclfi.org. You guys can be found on social media, yes?
Yep, search up Red Battler, you should be able to find us on
so
any of the
on
major ones.
Insta, Red Battler.
Front page, bust the union busters, chuck the bosses like he's out of the ALP-ACT.
Sounds like a great headline. All right, well, thank you, comrades, for spending your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.